The year was 1902, when a desperate man made a decision that would alter not just his life, but the legacy of an entire mountain town. Dr. Kemi Adakai had nothing but his medical bag and mounting debts when he received an unusual proposal from the wealthiest widow in the territory. 7 days after their hasty wedding, he would discover a truth that would shake the very foundation of everything he thought he knew about wealth, power, and the true cost of healing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain town of Eagles Crossing perched precariously between jagged peaks and deep, shadow-filled valleys, where the air tasted of pine and coal dust. In winter, snow blanketed the slopes in pristine white that quickly turned to grey slush in the streets below. In summer, wildflowers dotted the meadows, while miners trudged daily into the dark moor of the Blackfeather mine, owned by the infamous Nashota family for 3 generations. Dr. Kemi Adakai had arrived in Eagles Crossing 4 years earlier, a 32-year-old physician with hopeful eyes and steady hands, his medical degree from back east still crisp and uncreased. He'd come seeking purpose in this frontier town where medical care was scarce and needs were many. His grandfather, a respected Navajo healer, had taught him that medicine was not just science, but sacred duty, a lesson that medical school had tried to drill out of him, but which Kemi held close to his heart even now. The small clinic he established on Sycamore Street became his life's work, a modest 2-story building with examination rooms downstairs and his sparse living quarters above. The wooden sign swinging from rusted chains simply read, "Dr. Adakai, Physician," in faded gold lettering. During his first year, townsfolk regarded him with suspicion, reluctant to trust a native doctor with their ailments. But after successfully treating the mayor's daughter for scarlet fever when no one thought she would survive, opinions slowly shifted. "Doc's got magic in those hands," people whispered. "Different kinds of medicine, but it works." What most didn't see was how that magic came at a cost. Kemi never turned away patients who couldn't pay. He accepted chickens, fresh bread, mended clothes, whatever people could offer. For miners injured in cave-ins or children with winter coughs, he often charged nothing at all. He kept careful ledgers, neat columns of numbers that grew increasingly dire as the months passed. His suppliers in Denver weren't interested in chickens. As payment for medicines and surgical instruments, by his 4th winter in Eagles Crossing, Kemi's situation had grown desperate. The bank had sent 3 notices about his overdue loan payments. The clinic's roof leaked whenever it rained. His medical bag, once beautiful brown leather gifted by his father on graduation day, was now cracked and worn thin from constant use. The spine of his medical reference book was held together with twine, its pages stained with various medicinal tinctures. Kemi's personal appearance had similarly deteriorated. Though still handsome with his sharp cheekbones and intelligent, dark eyes, his clothes hung loose on his frame. He often forgot to eat while tending to patients, and sleep was a luxury rarely afforded between emergency house calls and his growing anxiety about finances. On particularly difficult nights, Kemi would climb to the roof of his clinic with a weathered blanket and gaze at the stars, remembering his grandfather's teachings about the night sky. "The constellations tell stories," the old man had said, "but they also remind us how small our troubles are in the vastness of creation." Yet the vastness offered little comfort when creditors came knocking. One such evening, after fixing the broken arm of a young miner who couldn't pay, Kemi sat at his desk reviewing his accounts by lamplight. The numbers blurred before his eyes, as a familiar headache took hold. The clinic needed $500 by month's end, or he'd lose everything. No matter how he calculated, the math remained stubbornly unchanged. He'd already sold his pocket watch and his mother's silver hairbrush. There was nothing left. In frustration, he swept the ledger from his desk, sending papers fluttering to the floor. As he bent to gather them, his fingers closed around an envelope he hadn't noticed before. It must have been slipped under his door while he was tending to the miner. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind used by people who had never worried about the cost of stationery. His name was written in elegant script across the front, the ink a deep purple that appeared almost black in the dim light. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the same heavy quality as the envelope. The message was brief but startling. Dr. Adakai, your presence is requested at Raven Hill Estate tomorrow at precisely 2 o'clock. A matter of great importance awaits your attention. Discretion is expected. Sincerely, Tallulah Nashota Keme stared at the note, reading it 3 times before its implication fully registered. Tallulah Nashota, the reclusive widow of Elias Nashota, who had owned everything of value in Eagle's Crossing until his death 5 years ago. The Nashotas rarely interacted with townsfolk except through intermediaries and managers. Their estate, Raven Hill, loomed on the mountainside above town like a stone sentinel, visible from everywhere, yet seemingly untouchable. Rumors about Tallulah abounded. Some said she was half mad with grief after Elias's death. Others claimed she was calculating and cold, running the mining operation with ruthless efficiency from behind closed doors. No one had seen her in town for years. The only people who entered Raven Hill were servants and business associates, all tight-lipped about its mistress. What could she possibly want with him? Kemi wondered if perhaps she was ill. The Nashota family had always employed a private physician from Denver who visited monthly. If she was calling on him, the situation must be unusual indeed. Sleep eluded him that night as speculation filled his mind. By morning, dark circles shadowed his eyes, but curiosity and necessity propelled him forward. He spent an hour pressing his only decent shirt, mending a small tear in his coat sleeve, and polishing his scuffed boots until they gleamed. His reflection in the cracked mirror revealed a man trying desperately to appear more prosperous than he was. The journey to Raven Hill took nearly an hour on foot, the steep path winding through pine forests and around jutting rocks. As Keme climbed higher, the air grew colder and sharper in his lungs. The forest eventually gave way to immaculately landscaped grounds surrounding a mansion built from local granite and imported marble. Even in the winter light, the windows gleamed like eyes watching his approach. At precisely 2 o'clock, Kem stood before massive oak doors adorned with intricate carvings of ravens in flight. Before he could knock, the door swung open silently. A tall man in impeccable livery stood in the entryway, his face impassive. "Dr. Adakai," he said, "not a question, but a confirmation. Please follow me. Mrs. Nashota is waiting in the east parlor." The interior of Raven Hill eclipsed anything Kemi had ever seen. The entrance hall soared 2 stories high, dominated by a crystal chandelier that cast rainbow prisms across marble floors. Oil paintings of stern-faced men, the Nashota patriarchs, presumably, lined the walls, their eyes seeming to track his movements. A grand staircase swept upward like a frozen waterfall, its banister gleaming mahogany. The butler led him through corridors draped in silk wallpaper and carpets so thick his footsteps made no sound. They passed rooms filled with furniture that likely cost more than his entire clinic, libraries with leather-bound books, sitting rooms with velvet settees, a music room where a grand piano stood silent and expectant. Finally, they reached a set of double doors. The butler knocked once, then opened them without waiting for a response. "Dr. Keme Adakai, madam," he announced, then stepped aside to allow Keme entry. The east parlor was flooded with afternoon light from floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley below. Eagle's Crossing looked like a toy town from this height, smoke rising from chimneys in straight lines before dispersing into the winter sky. In the distance, the entrance to the Blackfeather mine was visible as a dark smudge against the mountainside. Near the window sat a woman in a high-backed chair, her posture impeccable despite her advanced years. Tallulah Nashota was not what Kemi had expected. Instead of a frail widow withered by time, she radiated a formidable presence. Her silver hair was arranged in an elegant knot at the nape of her neck. Her dress, deep burgundy with black trim, spoke of wealth worn with casual confidence. She wore no jewelry except for a single pendant, a piece of polished black stone suspended from a silver chain. Most striking were her eyes, coal dark and sharp as obsidian arrowheads. They assessed him without warmth or welcome, merely taking his measure as one might examine an unknown specimen. "Dr. Adakai," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic for a woman rumored to be approaching 70. "Prompt. Good. I detest tardiness." Kemi removed his hat, suddenly aware of every imperfection in his appearance. "Mrs. Nashota, thank you for your invitation. How may I be of service?" She gestured to a chair opposite hers. A tea service sat on the table between them, steam rising. From a porcelain pot painted with mountain scenes, "Sit tea." Without waiting for his response, she poured, her movements precise and economical, nothing wasted, not even motion. She handed him a cup so delicate he feared it might shatter in his calloused hands. "I'll come directly to the point, Doctor. I've been observing your work in town. You treat miners with the same care you show to merchants' wives. Your skills are considerable, your compassion excessive." She said this last word with faint distaste. "Your financial situation, however, is disastrous." Kemi nearly choked on his tea. "I wasn't aware my personal finances were common knowledge." A thin smile crossed her lips. "Very little escapes my notice in Eagle's Crossing, Doctor. The town exists because of my husband's vision and my continued indulgence. When the bank considers foreclosing on the only physician willing to treat miners, regardless of their ability to pay, I hear of it." She set down her cup with a faint clink. "You need money. I need a husband." Silence fell between them, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Kemi stared at her, certain he had misheard. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "I beg your pardon. Is there something unclear about my statement?" Tallulah asked, one silver eyebrow arched. "It's a simple proposition. Marriage, legal, binding. You continue your work in town with all debts cleared and an allowance that will keep your clinic operational in perpetuity. I retain control of my late husband's business interests, but gain the convenience of a respectable marital status for certain upcoming negotiations." Kemi set his teacup down carefully, afraid his trembling hands might betray his shock. "Mrs. Nashota, with all due respect, this is highly unusual. We're strangers, and surely there are men of better social standing who would—" "I require 3 qualities in a husband, Doctor," she interrupted. "Intelligence, which you possess, discretion, which your patient confidentiality suggests you understand, and most importantly, no interest whatsoever in controlling my fortune." Her eyes bored into his. "Men of better social standing inevitably believe they should manage my affairs. You, I suspect, care more about saving lives than counting coins." She stood and walked to the window, her reflection superimposed on the panorama below. "I am offering you financial salvation, Dr. Adakai. In exchange, I ask for your name and occasional presence at certain functions. Our private lives remain separate. After 1 year, we revisit the arrangement. If either party wishes to dissolve it, generous terms will be provided." Kemi's mind raced. Was this some elaborate jest? A test? Yet the woman before him didn't seem given to either humor or games. Her proposal, outlandish as it was, appeared sincere. "Why me?" he asked finally. Of all the people in Eagle's Crossing, why choose a native doctor barely keeping his practice? Afloat? Tallulah turned from the window, studying him with those penetrating eyes. For a moment, something flickered in their depths, something beyond calculation, something almost human, because, Dr. Adakai, you are both desperate enough to accept and principled enough to honor the terms, because your patients need you, and I need a particular kind of husband. She returned to her seat, and because I'm running out of time. This last statement hung in the air between them. Before Keme could question it, the butler reappeared at the door. Dr. Adakai's return transportation is ready, madam. Tallulah nodded. Consider my offer, doctor. You have until tomorrow to decide. My messenger will await your answer at your clinic at noon. She handed him an envelope from her desk. This contains the details of our arrangement and what I propose to do for your clinic immediately upon your acceptance. Kem took the envelope, its weight suggesting multiple pages inside. His fingers brushed against hers, cool and dry, like autumn leaves. One more thing, doctor, she said as he rose to leave. This conversation never happened. If you decline, destroy the documents, and we will never speak of it again. If you accept... Her voice trailed off, and for the first time, she looked away. Well, decision first, consequences after. The butler escorted him back through the labyrinthine corridors. The mansion seemed darker now, shadows pooling in corners where sunlight couldn't reach. As Kem stepped outside, he noticed a sleek black, a carriage waiting, a matched pair of grey horses stamping impatiently. To take you back to town, sir, the butler explained. The ride down the mountain passed in a blur as Keem's thoughts tumbled over each other like stones in a flash flood. Marriage. To Tallulah Nashota, the idea was absurd. Yet the weight of the envelope in his pocket, the promise of salvation for his clinic and the patients who depended on him, was undeniable. By the time the carriage deposited him at his clinic door, night was falling. Inside, 3 patients awaited him, a miner's wife with a persistent cough, a child with a split chin needing stitches, and an elderly man whose arthritic hands could barely grasp his walking stick. None could pay in anything but gratitude. Hours later, after tending to their needs, Kame finally opened the envelope by lamplight. The documents inside detailed financial arrangements more generous than he could have imagined, not just clearing his debts, but providing funds for new equipment, medicines, even hiring an assistant. There was also a separate account designated for treating those who couldn't pay. With these resources, he could help everyone in Eagle's Crossing. No more turning away complicated cases, no more improvising with inadequate supplies, no more lying, awake wondering if he'd still have a clinic the next month, all for the price of his name. His independence, and binding himself to a woman whose true motives remained obscure. Kemi climbed to the clinic's roof one last time as a free man, the documents clutched in his hand. Above him, stars punctured the velvet darkness, just as they had on countless nights before. He thought of his grandfather's wisdom, his father's pride, when he earned his medical degree. What would they say about this bargain he was contemplating? The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the scent of snow and secrets from the mountain above. From Raven Hill, lights gleamed like earthbound stars, where Tallulah Nashota waited for his answer. As dawn broke over Eagle's Crossing, painting the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold, Dr. Keme Adakai made his decision. For better or worse, his fate would soon be intertwined with the mysterious mining widow and whatever secrets lurked behind those raven-carved doors. The messenger arrived at precisely noon the following day, just as Tallulah had promised. He was a young man with serious eyes, dressed in the livery of Raven Hill Estate, charcoal grey, with raven insignias embroidered on the lapels. He stood silently at the clinic's entrance, neither entering nor speaking, simply waiting as patients shuffled past him with curious glances. Keme had been awake since before dawn. After a night of little sleep and much contemplation, he had risen to treat an emergency, a logger with a deep gash in his thigh. The work provided welcome distraction, but now, as he washed blood from his hands in a basin of quickly reddening water, the moment of decision could no longer be postponed. He dried his hands on a clean towel, straightened his waistcoat, and approached the messenger. From his pocket, he withdrew a sealed envelope of his own, nowhere near the quality of Tallulah's stationery, but the best he could find in his desk. "Please inform Mrs. Nashota that I accept her proposal," Kemi said quietly, handing over the envelope containing his formal acceptance. "With the conditions outlined in my response." The young man nodded once, tucked the envelope inside his jacket, and departed without a word. It was done. For better or worse, Keme Adakai had agreed to become the husband of the most powerful woman in Eagle's Crossing. The remainder of the day passed in a fog of unreality. Keme treated patients mechanically, his mind elsewhere, climbing the winding path to Raven Hill, imagining the life that awaited him. By evening, as he was preparing to close the clinic, a different messenger arrived. This one came not on foot, but driving a handsome black carriage, its polished wood gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. "Dr. Adakai," the driver said with a slight bow. "I've been instructed to deliver this and await your readiness." He handed Keme another envelope, this one sealed with dark red wax, impressed with the Nashota raven crest. Inside was a bank draft for an amount that made Kem's breath catch, along with a brief note in that same elegant purple ink. "Arrangements made. Marriage tomorrow at 10 a.m. Bring only what you cannot live without. All else will be provided. TN." The finality of it struck Keme like a physical blow. Tomorrow. No long engagement, no time for second thoughts or preparations. Just as with everything else in his life, Tallulah Nashota moved with decisive efficiency. "How soon does Mrs. Nashota expect?" "Me," Keme asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "I was instructed to return with you this evening, sir. Your quarters have been prepared at Raven Hill." Keme glanced around his modest clinic, the worn examining table, the shelves of carefully hoarded medicines, the frayed rug his mother had woven years ago. 4 years of his life were contained within these walls. Now he was to leave it all behind for a mansion on the hill and a marriage of convenience to a woman he barely knew. "Give me an hour," he said finally. The driver nodded and retreated to wait with the carriage. Keme moved through the clinic with purpose now, selecting only what was truly irreplaceable: his medical bag and instruments, several rare reference books, a small wooden box containing personal mementos, and a medicine pouch his grandfather had given him, filled with sacred herbs and stones. Everything else, his clothes, his furniture, even most of his books, could be replaced with Tallulah's money. Before departing, he wrote notes to his regular patients explaining that the clinic would be closed temporarily but would reopen soon with expanded services. He left these with Mrs. Littlefeather next door, who had often helped with nursing duties when cases were numerous. "You look like a man walking to his own funeral," she observed, accepting the stack of notes. "Or perhaps to a very strange rebirth." Kem replied with a wry smile. The drive to Raven Hill seemed both infinitely long and far too brief. The carriage wheels crunched on the gravel path as they ascended, each turn bringing him closer to his new life. Dusk had fallen by the time they reached the mansion, and lights blazed from every window, as if the household were preparing for a grand celebration rather than a business arrangement disguised as matrimony. The butler who had escorted him the previous day met him at the entrance. "Welcome, Dr. Adakai. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your quarters." "Will Mrs. Nashota be joining me for dinner?" Keme asked as they moved through the cavernous hallways. "The mistress dines alone in her private chambers," the butler replied without inflection. "She has arranged for your meal to be served in your rooms tonight, Tomorrow, after the ceremony, you will dine together. The suite assigned to Keme was larger than his entire clinic. A sitting room with a crackling fire opened into a bedroom dominated by a massive four-poster bed. Beyond that was a private bath with copper fixtures and heated water piped directly to a clawfoot tub. A wardrobe stood open, already filled with clothing in his size. Suits, shirts, waistcoats, all of the finest quality. How did she know my measurements? Keme wondered aloud. Mrs. Nashota is very thorough in her preparations, sir, the butler replied. Your dinner will be served in half an hour. Is there anything you require in the meantime? Kem shook his head, still trying to absorb the opulence surrounding him. After the butler departed, he explored his new domain, touching the silk bed covers, testing the softness of the Turkish carpet beneath his feet. On the writing desk lay a stack of papers, legal documents regarding their marriage, property agreements, financial arrangements, all requiring his signature before the ceremony. The implications were staggering. According to these papers, Keme would have access to substantial funds for his clinic and personal use, but no claim whatsoever on Tallulah's business holdings or primary assets. In the event of her death, he would retain only what had been specifically designated as his. The arrangement was clearly designed to prevent him from claiming any significant portion of the Nashota fortune. One document in particular caught his attention, a medical proxy giving him full authority over her healthcare decisions should she become incapacitated. This seemed at odds with the distance she otherwise maintained in their arrangement. Dinner arrived on a silver tray, roasted pheasant, potatoes with herbs, fresh bread, and a bottle of wine that probably cost more than a month's rent on his clinic. Kemeate mechanically, tasting little despite the quality of the food. His mind kept returning to the woman one floor above him, the enigmatic Tallulah Nashota, and what could possibly be driving her unusual actions. Sleep eluded him that night despite the luxurious bed. He lay awake, watching moonlight filter through lace curtains, casting patterns on the ceiling like ghostly cobwebs. What had he agreed to? What would his parents think if they were alive to see this strange turn of events? His father had always taught him that a man's word was sacred. Once given, it could not be withdrawn without grave consequences. He had given his word to Tallulah Nashota, and tomorrow he would honor it. Morning arrived with a soft knock at his door. A young woman in a maid's uniform entered carrying a breakfast tray and fresh clothing for the ceremony. Mrs. Nashota requests that you be ready by 9:30, sir, she said, laying out the items on the bed, a formal suit of charcoal grey with a silver waistcoat and tie. The justice of the peace will arrive at 10. Thank you, Keme replied. Then, on impulse, what's your name? The maid looked startled at being addressed directly. Ayasha, sir. How long have you worked for Mrs. Nashota, Ayasha? 3 years, sir. Her eyes darted toward the door as if checking for eavesdroppers. And what kind of mistress is she? Keme pressed, keeping his voice gentle. Ayasha hesitated before answering. Fair, sir. Demanding but fair. She doesn't tolerate mistakes, but she pays well and never raises her voice. Another pause. She's not what people in town think. That's all I can say. With that cryptic statement, she curtsied and withdrew, leaving Keme with more questions than answers. The ceremony itself was brief and coldly efficient. The justice of the peace, a nervous man who kept darting glances at Tallulah as if afraid she might suddenly transform into something dangerous, performed the minimum legal requirements. In the grand drawing room, Tallulah wore a gown of deep aubergine, her silver hair arranged elegantly beneath a small hat with a veil that partially obscured her face. She spoke her vows clearly, without emotion, the words falling between them like stones. Kem, for his part, found himself strangely moved, despite the business-like nature of their union. There was something solemn and weighty about making such promises, even under these unusual circumstances. When instructed to place the ring on her finger, of her simple band of platinum that had been provided for him, he did so with unexpected reverence. No kiss sealed their union. The justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife. Tallulah signed a bank draft that made the man's eyes widen, and it was done. Keme Adakai was now legally bound to this formidable woman and her mountain empire. The staff has been informed of our arrangement, Tallulah said, as they sat opposite each other at lunch following the ceremony. It was their first meal together, served in a dining room that could have accommodated 20 guests comfortably. As far as they are concerned, we are husband and wife in the traditional sense. Their discretion is assured. Keme nodded, cutting a piece of salmon with surgical precision, and the town, what explanation shall we give for this sudden union? A whirlwind romance, Tallulah replied with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. The lonely widow, impressed by the dedicated young doctor's skill and compassion. We needn't elaborate beyond that. And my clinic will reopen in 3 days, fully supplied and staffed with a nurse I've engaged from Denver. You may continue your practice as before, with certain adjustments to accommodate your new status. Such as? Keem raised an eyebrow. You will reside here at Raven Hill. A carriage will take you to and from town daily. You will attend certain social functions with me as necessary, and you will be available for consultation regarding my health when required. She sipped her water, her expression unchanged. Beyond that, your time is your own. Keme studied her across the expanse of polished mahogany. In daylight, he could see fine lines around her eyes and mouth that spoke of years of care or perhaps pain. Despite her advanced age, there was nothing frail about her. She radiated authority and self-possession. May I ask a personal question, Mrs. Nashota? He ventured. You may ask. I may not answer. Why did you really choose me? There must be others who would have served your purpose equally well. Tallulah set down her glass carefully. You possess qualities I value, Dr. Adakai: integrity, intelligence, and you understand suffering without being broken by it. She met his gaze directly. Also, your heritage makes you an outsider in Eagle's Crossing, despite your position. You know what it is to live between worlds. We have that in common. Before Keme could inquire about this unexpected revelation, she rose from the table. I have business matters to attend to this afternoon. Chenoa will show you around the estate. I suggest you use the next few days to familiarize yourself with your new home before resuming your practice. With that, she swept from the room, leaving Keme to contemplate her words. There had been something in her tone when she mentioned living between worlds, a momentary crack in her imposing facade, revealing some deeper truth she kept carefully guarded. Chenoa turned out to be the estate's housekeeper, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She led Keme through the mansion's many rooms, explaining the rhythms of the household, when meals were served, which areas were open to him, which were Tallulah's private domain. The mistress values her privacy, Chenoa explained as they walked through an extensive library with books floor to ceiling. Her study and personal chambers on the East Wing's 2nd floor are strictly off-limits unless you're specifically invited. What about this room? Keme asked, pausing before a locked door in the west corridor. Chenoa's expression grew guarded. That was Mr. Nashota's private study. It's been sealed since his passing. Does my wife ever go there? Keme found the words "my wife" strange on his tongue. Only on certain days, Chenoa replied carefully. Anniversaries, birthdays, days that held meaning for them. As their tour continued, Keme began to form a mental map of Raven Hill, not just its physical layout, but its emotional topography. There were rooms filled with light, and others where shadows seemed to cling regardless of the time of day. The servants moved efficiently, but spoke in hushed tones, as if too much noise might disturb something best left sleeping. The grounds were equally impressive. Formal gardens now dormant under winter frost, a greenhouse where tropical plants thrived despite the mountain climate, stables housing a dozen fine horses, and paths leading into the surrounding pine forest. From certain vantage points, Keme could see the operations of the Black Feather mine in the distance, men moving like ants around the entrance, carts of ore being transported down to the processing facilities in the valley. The mine is still very productive, Chenoa commented following his gaze. Mr. Nashota had an instinct for where to dig. They say he could feel the metal calling to him through the rock. And Mrs. Nashota, does she share this instinct? Chenoa's expression grew thoughtful. The mistress has her own gifts. By evening, Keme's head was swimming with information and impressions. He retired to his quarters to find fresh clothes laid out and a note informing him that dinner would be served in the small dining room at 7. This time, Tallulah would join him. She appeared precisely on time, now dressed in a simpler gown of midnight blue. A servant poured wine and served the first course before discreetly withdrawing. "I trust Chenoa's tour was informative," Tallulah said, unfolding her napkin with practiced grace. "Very. You have a remarkable home. It's yours now, too, in a manner of speaking." She regarded him over the rim of her wineglass. "Does that disturb you, finding yourself suddenly transplanted into such different circumstances?" Keme considered the question. "I've never been one to judge a situation prematurely. My grandfather taught me that first impressions are usually incomplete. A wise man, he was. He also taught me that everything in nature seeks balance. When something appears unbalanced, like our arrangement, I can't help wondering what forces are at work beneath the surface. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, crossed Tallulah's features. Perhaps in time you'll discover those forces. And for yourself, Doctor." The conversation shifted to more practical matters, the reopening of his clinic, his scheduled appearances as her husband at upcoming social events, arrangements for his transportation to and from town. Throughout the meal, Keme found himself studying Tallulah, searching for clues to her true nature and motivations. There were moments when her mask slipped slightly, a flash of weariness when she thought he wasn't looking, a tightness around her mouth when the mine was mentioned. Once, when speaking of a charity event for miners' families, a surprising passion animated her voice before she caught herself and resumed her cool demeanor. "May I ask about your health?" Keme inquired as dessert was served, a delicate apple tart with cinnamon. "As your physician, as well as your husband, I should be informed of any conditions requiring attention." Tallulah set down her fork. "My health is complex but currently stable. I maintain detailed records which I will make available to you. And your regular physician from Denver? Dr. Mercer has been informed of our marriage and your medical qualifications. He will transfer my case to you and remain available for consultation if necessary." She dabbed her lips with her napkin. "But my condition is not why I married you, Doctor, at least not directly." Before Keme could press further, Tallulah changed the subject, asking about his plans for expanding the clinic's services. The moment for revelations had passed. As the evening concluded, she rose with fluid grace despite her years. "Tomorrow I have meetings regarding the mine operations. You're welcome to explore the estate further or begin preparations for your clinic's reopening. My carriage is at your disposal." She paused at the doorway. "We will dine together each evening when possible. I find I appreciate your conversation." With that unexpectedly personal admission, she departed, leaving Keme alone with his thoughts and the growing certainty that there was far more to Tallulah Nashota and their marriage than he had initially understood. Later, as he stood by the window of his chambers, watching moonlight silver the pine forests surrounding Raven Hill, Keem reflected on the swift, strange turn his life had taken. Yesterday, he'd been a struggling physician worrying about unpaid bills. Tonight, he was the husband of the wealthiest woman in the territory, sleeping in a mansion that could house 50 families comfortably. Yet despite these luxurious surroundings, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stepped into a story already in progress, one whose beginning remained obscure and whose ending was far from certain. Somewhere in this labyrinth of wealth and privilege, secrets waited to be uncovered. And somehow, Keme Adakai, outsider, healer, now husband, was meant to play a role in their revelation. The transition from penniless physician to husband of Eagles Crossing's wealthiest resident happened with dizzying speed. 3 days after the wedding, just as Tallulah had promised, Keme's clinic reopened to a crowd of curious townsfolk. The modest building had undergone a remarkable transformation. Fresh paint outside, new equipment inside, and shelves stocked with medicines that Keme had previously only read about in medical journals. Miss Winona Kingbird, the nurse Tallulah had engaged from Denver, proved to be a competent professional with quick hands and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her arrival caused almost as much gossip as Keme's sudden marriage. "You hired an Indian nurse," whispered Mrs. Palmer, the banker's wife, as Keme examined her child's throat. She glanced nervously at Winona, who was efficiently organizing supplies across the room. "Miss Kingbird is Lakota, with formal training from Chicago," Keme replied, evenly, "and my wife selected her personally for her qualifications." The words, "my wife," still felt foreign on his tongue, a costume he was trying on rather than an identity he had grown into. But he noted with satisfaction how Mrs. Palmer's objections melted away at the mention of Tallulah Nashota's approval. If the formidable mining widow deemed something appropriate, few in Eagles Crossing dared contradict her. The daily rhythm of Kem's new life quickly established itself. Mornings began with breakfast in his private suite at Raven Hill, often accompanied by correspondence from medical suppliers or notes from Tallulah about household matters. The Nashota carriage would deliver him to the clinic by 8 o'clock, where patients now lined up daily, drawn by curiosity about the doctor's elevated status and the clinic's improved facilities. Winona proved invaluable, managing the increased patient flow and assisting with procedures that Keme had previously struggled to perform alone. With proper equipment and medications, he could now offer treatments he'd only theorized about before. The mine workers especially benefited, their lung ailments and injuries finally receiving proper care rather than makeshift remedies. Each evening, the carriage returned him to Raven Hill in time to change for dinner with Tallulah. These meals became a curious ritual, formal yet increasingly comfortable as they discovered shared interests in literature and natural sciences. Tallulah revealed herself to be exceptionally well-read, with opinions on everything from Shakespeare to recent medical advancements. "My husband encouraged intellectual pursuits," she explained one evening, referring to the late Elias Nashota. "He believed women's minds were criminally underutilized in society." A progressive view for a mining magnate, Keme observed. Elias was complex. Something flickered in Tallulah's eyes, a memory or emotion quickly masked. "You would have found him fascinating, I think. He had an insatiable curiosity about indigenous cultures. Your grandfather's healing traditions would have intrigued him greatly." These glimpses into her past emerged rarely, like gold flecks in a prospector's pan, brief, precious, and quickly gone. More often, their conversations centered on clinic cases or community matters. Tallulah had an uncanny knowledge of Eagles Crossing's inhabitants and their interconnected lives. "The Halverson boy isn't sickly because of weak constitution," she noted when Keem mentioned a particularly troublesome case. "His father drinks his wages, and the family often goes hungry. Arrange for food deliveries, anonymously of course. His symptoms will improve." Her assessment proved correct. confirming Kem's growing suspicion that Tallulah maintained an invisible network of information throughout the town. Nothing escaped her notice, despite her physical absence from its streets for years. 2 weeks into their arrangement, the first test of their public partnership arrived, a dinner hosting potential investors for a new processing facility near the mine. Kem found himself suddenly thrust into the role of wealthy hostess's husband, expected to engage in conversations about business and politics with men whose watch chains cost more than his former monthly income. "Just be yourself," Tallulah advised. As they prepared that evening, she in an elegant gown of emerald silk, he in a tailored suit that still felt borrowed despite having been made specifically for him. These men respect intelligence and directness, even from a Navajo doctor who married above his station, Keme asked with a wry smile. Tallulah's eyes met his in the mirror as she fastened a necklace of polished gemstones. "Especially from him. You underestimate how your uniqueness serves our purposes, Doctor." The dinner proceeded more smoothly than Keme anticipated. While initially regarded with barely concealed curiosity, he soon found himself engaged in substantive discussions about public health in mining communities. His first-hand experience treating miners' ailments provided insights the investors found valuable, especially when he diplomatically suggested that improved working conditions might reduce medical expenses in the long term. Throughout the evening, he observed Tallulah in her element, commanding attention without raising her voice, steering conversations with the precision of a river pilot navigating treacherous waters. She neither flaunted her wealth nor apologized for it, wearing her power as naturally as she wore the jetstones at her throat. What struck Keme most, however, was how she occasionally glanced his way during key moments of negotiation, a silent communication passing between them that he somehow understood, despite their brief acquaintance. When she mentioned his proposal for a small infirmary at the mine site itself, treating his idea as a joint venture they had developed together, Keme felt an unexpected warmth spread through him. Not quite pride, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, perhaps. Later that night, as the last guests departed, Tallulah paused on the mansion's wide porch, gazing out at the valley below, where Eagle's Crossing twinkled with lamplight. "You performed admirably," she said, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp night air. "The Henderson contract is practically secured." "Happy to be of service," Kem replied, standing beside her. "Though I confess most of my medical training didn't cover dinner conversation with mining investors." Her lips curved slightly, the closest thing to a true smile he had yet seen from her. "Adaptation is a powerful skill, Doctor, one you possess in abundance." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the mountain night enveloping them in its vastness. Keme was struck by how comfortable this silence felt, neither awkward nor pressured, simply two people sharing space after a long evening. "May I ask you something personal?" he ventured. Tallulah turned to face him, her expression guarded once more. "You may ask. Why do you still call me Doctor? We're married, however unconventionally. Surely first names would be appropriate. At least in private." She studied him, her dark eyes reflecting the porch lanterns. "Formality provides clarity, Doctor. It reminds us of both of the parameters of our arrangement." "Does it?" Keme challenged gently. "Or does it maintain a distance that serves some other purpose?" Something shifted in her expression, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. "Perhaps both." She turned toward the door. "Good night, Keme." His name sounded strange in her voice, almost intimate. "Sleep well." As she disappeared into the house, Keme remained on the porch, contemplating this small victory. A first name used, a tiny crack in her formidable armor. It wasn't much, but in the kingdom of Raven Hill, every concession felt significant. Days that followed brought new dimensions to their unusual partnership. Keme's clinic flourished under the Nashota patronage, treating 3 times the patients he had previously managed. Word spread through the territory, bringing people from neighboring settlements seeking the doctor whose mysterious marriage had elevated him from struggling physician to medical pioneer. At Raven Hill, Keme gradually became more than just an occupant. The staff, initially formal to the point of stiffness, began to warm to him as he learned their names, inquired about their families, and treated minor ailments without fuss. Ayasha, the young maid who had helped him on his first morning, sought his advice for her mother's persistent cough. The stable master, a taciturn man named Hinto, eventually showed Keme the hidden trails through the estate's extensive forests. Only Tallulah remained somewhat distant, though their evening conversations continued to deepen. She shared more about the mine operations, explaining complex business matters with surprising patience. Kem found himself genuinely interested in the enterprise that supported not just Raven Hill, but the entire town below. "The eastern seam is showing signs of playing out," she explained one evening in her study, pointing to geological maps spread across her desk. Elias always believed the real wealth lay to the north, but reaching it requires significant investment. Hence, the dinner with investors, Keme surmised. Precisely. Tallulah traced a line on the map with one finger, the silver ring she always wore catching the lamplight. "The Henderson contract will fund the new shaft. If my calculations are correct, it could extend the mine's productive life by 20 years. Securing Eagles Crossing's future, Kem observed. Tallulah glanced up at him, something unreadable in her expression. "Yes, long after I'm gone." The comment hung in the air between them, reminding Keme of the medical record she had promised to share but had not yet produced. Whatever condition afflicted her remained unspoken, though he occasionally noticed signs, a momentary unsteadiness. When rising too quickly, a barely perceptible tremor in her right hand, sometimes concealed by clasping her fingers together. On the third Sunday after their wedding, Keme returned early from the clinic, having treated only a few patients with minor complaints. He found Raven Hill unusually quiet, many of the staff having been given the afternoon off. Seeking Tallulah to discuss a supply order for the clinic, he was informed by Chenoa that the mistress was observing her Sunday ritual and could not be disturbed. "What ritual is this?" Keme inquired. Chenoa's expression grew guarded. "It's not my place to say, Doctor. Perhaps you should ask Mrs. Nashota directly, tomorrow." Curiosity piqued, Keme retreated to the library, selecting a medical journal to occupy his time. The vast room, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable leather chairs, had become his favorite retreat in the mansion. Here, surrounded by knowledge accumulated over generations, he could almost forget the strangeness of his situation. As afternoon faded into evening, Keme found himself drawn to the window overlooking the estate's western grounds. Movement caught his eye, a solitary figure walking along a narrow path that led away from the gardens into the pine forest beyond. The distinctive aubergine shawl identified the walker as Tallulah, moving with purpose towards some unknown destination. Without consciously deciding to follow, Kem found himself setting aside his journal and heading downstairs. The crisp autumn air greeted him as he stepped outside, the sun already dipping toward the mountain peaks. He kept a respectful distance, not wishing to intrude, but unable to quell his curiosity about this weekly ritual Chenoa had mentioned. The path wound through tall pines, their scent sharp and clean in the cooling air. After about 15 minutes' walk, the trees opened into a small clearing. At its center stood a structure Keme hadn't seen during his previous explorations of the grounds. A stone cottage, small but beautifully crafted, with a slate roof and climbing roses now dormant for the season. Tallulah approached the cottage door, removing a key from her pocket. Before entering, she paused, her head turning slightly as if sensing his presence. Keme stepped back into the shadow of the trees, suddenly ashamed of his intrusion on what was clearly a private moment. He watched as she disappeared inside, the doctor closing firmly behind her. Respecting her privacy, Keme returned to the main house, though questions multiplied in his mind. What purpose did this hidden cottage serve? Why did Tallulah visit it weekly with such ritualistic regularity? And why did it inspire such reticence among the staff when mentioned? At dinner that evening, Tallulah appeared dressed as always in her informal dining attire, showing no sign of her afternoon excursion. Their conversation followed familiar patterns: clinic matters, business developments, literary discussions. But beneath the normalcy, Keme sensed a subtle shift. Her gaze seemed more distant, her responses slightly delayed, as if part of her remained in that stone cottage among the pines. "I walked the Western Trail this afternoon," he said finally, during a lull in conversation. "The forest there has a different character than the eastern slopes. Wilder, somehow." Tallulah's fork paused midway to her mouth. "Indeed, the western woods have never been properly tamed." She set her fork down carefully. "Did your walk take you far?" The question contained multitudes, an acknowledgement, a challenge, an opportunity for honesty. Keme chose the latter. "Far enough to see the stone cottage in the clearing," he admitted. "I didn't approach once I realized you were there. It seemed private." Silence stretched between them, taut as a surgery suture. Finally, Tallulah nodded. A single, decisive motion. "We will discuss it another time," she said, her tone closing the subject more effectively than a slammed door. That night, unable to sleep, Keme stood at his bedroom window gazing out at the moonlit grounds. The western forest was a dark mass. Against the night sky, its secrets held close. Somewhere in its depths stood the cottage, and within it, he suspected, lay answers to the riddle of Tallulah Nashota. The following day brought an unexpected development. Keme returned from the clinic to find a leather portfolio placed on his desk, tied with a black ribbon. A note in Tallulah's distinctive handwriting lay atop it. "These are the medical records I promised. Review them thoroughly. Questions tomorrow. Evening, we dine at 7 as usual." To TN. Inside the portfolio, Keme found detailed documentation spanning nearly 15 years. Examinations, test results, treatment regimens, progression notes. All pertained to a condition he recognized immediately: Parkinson's disease, detected early but advancing steadily despite various interventions. The most recent assessment, dated just 2 months prior, indicated progression to stage 3 with increasing tremors, rigidity, and occasional cognitive impacts. The records painted a clear picture of a brilliant mind trapped in a gradually failing body, and a woman determined to manage her decline with the same precision she applied to business matters. Notes from Dr. Mercer, her previous physician, described her as an exceptional patient, informed, compliant with treatment, yet realistic about prognosis. One notation particularly caught Keme's attention. Patient expresses concern about maintaining control of business interests as condition progresses, seeking legal and personal solutions to ensure continuity of operations without family interference. Family interference. The phrase echoed in Keme's mind as he organized the records chronologically. Tallulah had never mentioned family beyond her late husband. Were there relatives with claims on the Nashota fortune? Relatives she sought to circumvent through her marriage to Keme? At dinner that evening, Keme found Tallulah already seated, her posture more rigid than usual, hands folded carefully on the tablecloth to conceal any tremor. The portfolio sat on a side table, a silent third presence at their meal. "You've reviewed the records," she said. "Not a question." "Yes." Dr. Mercer's notes are thorough. The progression is consistent with typical patterns, though you've responded well to the medication regimen. Tallulah nodded. And your assessment? Without a full examination, I can only speculate based on the documentation. But it appears you're managing the symptoms effectively for now. Kami hesitated. May I ask why you've chosen to share this information at this particular time? Because knowledge is power, Doctor. And in our arrangement, balanced power serves us both. She reached for her wineglass with deliberate control. I require a physician who understands my condition intimately, and a husband who comprehends why certain arrangements have been made. The medical proxy, Kame said, understanding Dawn. Among other things. Tallulah sipped her wine, her gaze direct and unflinching. Parkinson's is a progressive condition. While my mind remains clear, I must establish structures that protect what matters most. The mind, Kami suggested, not just the mind. Something flashed in her eyes, frustration perhaps at his failure to grasp some essential point. There are those who would dismantle everything Elias and I built, given the opportunity. Your presence prevents that legally and practically. These people who threaten your legacy, who are they? Kami pressed gently. Tallulah's expression closed like a shuttered window. That is a conversation for another time. For now, I require your medical opinion on adjusting my treatment regimen. Dr. Mercer's last prescription seems less effective than previous formulations. The shift in conversation was deliberate and absolute. Kame recognized when a door had been firmly closed, at least temporarily. For the remainder of the evening, they discussed medication options, potential side effects, and monitoring protocols. Their interaction once again that of physician and patient rather than husband and wife. Later, as Keme prepared for bed, Aid knock sounded at his door. He opened it to find Ayasha standing there, something clutched in her hands. Mrs. Nashota asked me to deliver this, she said softly, extending what appeared to be a small leather-bound book. She said it might help you understand. The book was old, its cover worn smooth by years of handling. No title marked its spine or cover. Keme thanked Ayasha, who departed quickly, her expression suggesting that delivering this item made her nervous, alone. Keme opened the book to discover not printed pages, but handwritten entries, a journal or diary. The ink faded on earlier pages, more vibrant in later sections. The handwriting was not Tallulah's elegant script, but a bolder, more angular hand. The first page bore only a simple inscription, "Property of Elias Nashota." Private Kime closed the book quickly, struck by the intimacy of what he'd been given. His predecessor's private thoughts, offered now as some kind of explanation or evidence. The gesture suggested a level of trust he hadn't expected from Tallulah, yet also felt like a test of his character. Setting the journal aside, Kime moved to his window, now a habitual vantage point for contemplation. Below, Raven Hill slumbered. Under moonlight, its grandeur softened by shadows. Somewhere in this labyrinth of wealth and secrets, a story was unfolding. One that had begun long before his arrival and would continue beyond whatever role he had been cast to play. As a physician, he now understood Tallulah's physical frailty. As a husband in name, he recognized his place in her legal strategy. But as a man standing at the intersection of these realities, Keme sensed deeper currents running beneath the surface of their arrangement. Currents connected somehow to that. Stone cottage in the western woods, and the journal that now lay waiting on his bedside table. Tomorrow he will begin reading Elias Nashota's private thoughts. Tomorrow, perhaps, the true nature of his strange marriage would begin to reveal itself. Morning light filtered through the curtains as Kime turned to another page of Elias Nashota's journal. He had been reading since dawn, unable to put the weathered book aside once he'd begun. Sleep had come fitfully the night before, his mind too occupied with questions about Tallulah's motives for sharing this intensely personal document. The journal entries began 15 years earlier, chronicling the thoughts of a man whose vision extended far beyond the immediate wealth of his mining operation. Elias Nashota, as revealed through his private writings, was not the ruthless industrialist of town gossip, but a complex individual with progressive ideas and genuine concern for Eagles Crossing's long-term sustainability. September 12, 1887. Our tests confirm what I've suspected. The northern seam contains not just silver, but rare minerals with properties science has barely begun to understand. Tallulah suggests caution. Some treasures, she says, are best left buried until the world is ready for them. As always, her wisdom tempers my enthusiasm. We've sealed the test shaft for now. The main operation continues to produce enough to maintain our position without revealing our true discovery. Kemi paused, rereading the passage. What minerals had they discovered? And why keep such findings secret when they could potentially increase the mine's value? He continued reading, finding scattered references to the Northern Discovery throughout subsequent entries, though Elias never specified exactly what they had found. More illuminating were the entries about Tallulah herself, revealing dimensions to her character that Kemi had only glimpsed in their interactions. March 3rd, 1888. 20 years married today. While others see only the formidable Mrs. Nashota, I am privileged to know the woman beneath the public persona. Her intelligence continues to astonish me. The geological analysis she completed without formal training rivals anything from our so-called experts. If she had been born male, she might have run the entire mining industry by now. Instead, she must operate through me, a limitation that frustrates us both at times. June 17, 1889. Tallulah's headaches have returned. She dismisses them as nothing, but I've noticed the tremor in her right hand beginning again. Dr. Hayes suggests it might be more than exhaustion, possibly early signs of a nervous disorder. She refuses to acknowledge it, throwing herself into the new community school project instead. Her stubbornness both infuriates and endears. The entries continued, documenting the growing partnership between husband and wife, their shared vision for the mine and town, and eventually the progression of Tallulah's symptoms as doctors finally diagnosed her condition. Elias recorded each development with scientific precision and personal anguish, tracking medications, treatments, and specialists consulted. Then, in entries dated about 7 years ago, a new element entered the narrative. References to someone named Aponi. November 8, 1895. The situation with Aponi grows more complex. Tallulah insists she receive the best education possible, regardless of cost or conventional expectations. I've arranged the cottage renovations as requested. It will provide the privacy they both require, especially as Tallulah wishes to keep these arrangements from becoming public knowledge. Eagles Crossing remains disappointingly narrow-minded about certain matters. Kemi frowned, trying to place this name within what he knew of the Nashota household. Aponi, a female name, suggesting perhaps a relative or ward taken in by the couple. But why the secrecy? And what connection might this person have to the stone cottage he had discovered? The final entries grew increasingly concerned with Elias's health rather than Tallulah's, documenting his awareness of a heart condition that, his doctors warned, could prove fatal without significant lifestyle changes. February 4th, 1897, another episode today. The pain radiating down my left arm cannot be dismissed any longer. Tallulah found me in the study and insisted on summoning Dr. Hayes. The diagnosis remains unchanged. My heart is failing. Hayes recommends closing the mine operations and retiring to a warmer climate. Impossible. Too much remains unfinished. Too many plans still requiring implementation. Tallulah and Aponi need me to secure everything while I still can. The journal's final entry, dated just weeks before Elias's reported death, sent a chill through Kemi, April 22nd, 1897. The arrangements are complete. Legal documents prepared, accounts secured, contingencies established. Tallulah protests, of course, insisting I have years yet, perhaps, but I've seen the reports Hayes wouldn't show her. Months at best, weeks more likely. My only regret is leaving her to face what's coming alone. Kimama will never cease his attempts to control what we've built. Only Tallulah's strength stands between him and everything we've worked for, including Aponi's future. I've instructed Chenoa to maintain the cottage and its secrets after I'm gone. Tallulah will need that sanctuary, more than ever. The journal ended there, leaving Kemi with more questions than answers. Who was Kimama, clearly viewed as a threat? What was the special significance of the cottage? And most intriguingly, who was Aponi, mentioned with such concern in Elias's final thoughts? A soft knock interrupted his contemplation. Chenoa stood. At the door, her expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Nashota requests your presence in her study, Doctor. At your convenience." The phrase, "at your convenience" in Ravenhill parlance typically meant immediately. Kemi closed the journal and rose, wondering if Tallulah somehow knew he had finished reading, another example of her uncanny awareness of everything that happened under her roof. He found her at her desk, reviewing documents with the same focused intensity she brought to all tasks. Morning light emphasized the silver in her hair and the fine lines around her eyes, reminders of the decades of experience that separated them. Yet today, knowing more of her history through Elias's words, Kemi saw her differently. Not just as the imperious widow who had purchased a husband for convenience, but as a woman who had built something significant alongside a true partner, only to lose him and face threats alone. "You've read the journal," she said without preamble, setting aside her papers. "Yes." Kemi took the seat across from her, placing the leather-bound book on the desk between them. It was illuminating. In what way? Her tone was measured, experimental, testing how much he had truly understood from Elias's writings. "Your husband was not what town gossip suggested," Kemi began carefully. "His concern for Eagle's Crossing seems genuine, as was his devotion to you." Something softened briefly in Tallulah's expression. Elias saw possibilities where others saw only profit. It made him unusual among men of his position. He mentions a discovery in the northern seam, minerals beyond silver. Kemi watched her closely. "Is that what the new investment will help access?" "Partially." Tallulah's fingers tapped lightly on the desk. Not a Parkinson's tremor, but a deliberate gesture, considering how much to reveal. "The northern section contains deposits that could revolutionize certain industries. But accessing them requires technology that didn't exist in Elias's time, and now is developing." She leaned back slightly. "The Henderson contract includes partnerships with engineering firms working on new extraction methods. If successful, Eagle's Crossing will remain viable for generations, not merely decades." Kemi nodded, absorbing this information while working toward the questions that most intrigued him. Elias also mentioned someone named Aponi and another person, Kimama, who posed some kind of threat. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Tallulah's expression closed entirely, her hands now perfectly still on the desktop. "You read thoroughly," she observed after a moment. "More thoroughly than I anticipated. Who are they?" Kemi pressed gently. "Elias's final entry suggests these people are central to understanding your situation, and perhaps our arrangement." Tallulah rose abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the grounds. For nearly a minute she stood in silence, gazing outward while Kemi waited patiently. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before. "Kimama is my brother-in-law. Elias's younger brother, a man consumed by entitlement and resentment. She turned to face Keme, her posture rigid. He believes the Nashota mining empire should have been his to control, that Elias was unduly influenced by his foreign wife. The emphasis on foreign carried volumes of meaning. "You're not originally from this country," Kem surmised. "I came from Hungary as a young woman. My father was a geologist who corresponded with American mining companies. When he died unexpectedly, I used his research to secure a position as a consultant with Nashota Mining." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Elias was the only one who took my assessment seriously. 6 months later we married, to the horror of his family, especially Kimama. He never accepted me, called our marriage a mistake, a foreign scheme to steal his birthright." Her voice remained steady, but anger flashed in her eyes. When Elias fell ill, Kimama began legal maneuvers to challenge the company's succession plans. He has powerful friends in the territorial government. Money in the right pockets ensures sympathetic judges. "And this is where our marriage serves your purposes," Keme concluded. "A respectable local professional as husband strengthens your position legally. It removes certain vulnerabilities in my situation." "Yes." Tallulah returned to her desk, her movements measured and precise. "Kimama has attempted to portray me as an ailing widow of questionable competence, possibly influenced by foreign interests. Your presence complicates his narrative considerably." "And a pony?" Kime asked, sensing they were approaching the heart of the mystery. "Who is she?" The question hung in the air between them, weighty and significant. Tallulah studied him intently, as if measuring his worthiness to receive this particular truth. "That," she said finally, "is a matter for another conversation, one that requires additional context." She glanced at the clock on the mantel. "You have patients waiting at the clinic. Hinto has prepared the carriage." The dismissal was clear, yet Kame hesitated, reluctant to leave with the most intriguing question unanswered. "Tallulah," he said, using her first name deliberately, "these partial revelations serve neither of us well. As your husband, even in name only, I should understand the complete situation I've entered. You understand what's necessary for now." Her tone softened slightly. "Some truths require proper timing, Doctor. Trust that I will reveal everything when circumstances permit." With that, she returned her attention to her papers. The discussion clearly concluded. Keme recognized the futility of pressing further and departed for the clinic, his mind churning with new information and persistent questions. The morning at the clinic passed in a blur of patients and procedures, though Keme found his thoughts repeatedly returning to the mystery of a pony and the stone cottage. Winona noticed his distraction as they treated a miner with a badly lacerated arm. "You're miles away today, Doctor," she observed while preparing suture materials. "Trouble in paradise?" The gentle teasing reflected their growing professional rapport. Keme managed a smile as he cleaned the wound. "Just puzzling through a medical case." "Must be complicated to furrow your brow that way." Winona handed him the threaded needle with practiced efficiency. "My grandmother would say you're carrying too many questions without answers. It unbalances the spirit." "Your grandmother sounds wise. She was a medicine woman among our people. Said healing happens when we understand the whole story, not just the symptoms." Winona assisted with the final bandaging. "Sometimes you have to look beyond the obvious wound to find the true source of pain." Her words resonated with Kem as he completed his rounds. He was indeed seeing only symptoms of a larger situation. Tallulah's controlled revelations, the mystery of the cottage, the unnamed threat from Kimama, and the enigmatic Aponi, who seemed central to everything. That afternoon, rather than returning directly to Raven Hill after clinic hours, Keme asked Hinto to wait while he visited the town records office. The clerk, initially flustered by the appearance of Mrs. Nashota's new husband, became helpful when Keme explained he was researching property boundaries for potential clinic expansion. While the clerk searched for relevant maps, Keme casually examined the public record shelves, eventually locating birth and death registries for Eagle's Crossing. The death record confirmed what everyone knew. Elias Nashota had died of heart failure in May 1897, with Dr. Hayes as the attending physician. More interesting was what Keme found in the birth registry. Scanning entries from around the time Elias first mentioned a pony in his journal, he discovered a simple notation that sent a jolt through him. November 12, 1895. A pony Nashota, female. Parents, Elias Nashota and Tallulah Nashota. Attending midwife. Chinchinoa.Kem stared at the entry, his mind struggling to reconcile this information with what he knew. Tallulah would have been in her early 50s when this birth occurred, unusually late for a first child, almost medically remarkable. And if Tallulah and Elias had a daughter, where was she now? Why was she never mentioned in town gossip? Why had Tallulah herself never spoken of her? He carefully noted the information before the clerk returned with property maps. After a cursory examination, Keme thanked him and departed, his mind racing with implications. The return journey to Ravenhill gave him time to reorganize his understanding of the Nashota household. If the pony was indeed Tallulah and Elias's daughter, now approximately 7 years old, her absence from the main house was peculiar. The cottage in the woods, was that where the child lived? And if so, why such secrecy surrounding her existence? Upon arrival at Ravenhill, Keme sought out Chenoa, finding her supervising the preparation of evening meals in the kitchen. He waited until she stepped away from the staff before approaching. Chenoa, he began carefully, as Mrs. Nashota's physician, I'm reviewing family medical history. I've noticed some gaps in my information. The housekeeper's expression remained neutral, though her eyes betrayed wariness. How may I assist, doctor? I understand you attended the birth of a pony Nashota. He kept his voice low, aware of servants working nearby. As a medical professional, I'm curious about any hereditary conditions I should be monitoring. Chenoa's posture stiffened slightly. I believe such questions should be directed to the mistress, doctor. I've tried. She's reluctant to discuss the matter. Keme leaned closer. Chenoa, I'm not asking out of idle curiosity. If there's a child whose health might be affected by her mother's condition, I need to know. Something in his earnest concern seemed to reach the housekeeper. She glanced around, then spoke in barely more than a whisper. Sunday. Join the mistress on her walk to the cottage. She doesn't speak of it, but I believe she's been waiting for you to insist. Chenoa's expression softened momentarily. A pony should meet her mother's husband, regardless of the circumstances. Before Keme could press for more details, Chenoa returned to supervising the kitchen staff, clearly unwilling to continue the conversation. The brief exchange, however, confirmed his discoveries while raising new questions. Why would Tallulah need to wait for him to insist on meeting her own daughter? That evening, dinner proceeded with unusual tension. Tallulah seemed distracted, her gaze frequently drifting to the windows where darkness had fallen, obscuring the view of the western woods. Their conversation remained superficial. Clinic matters, weather observations, a brief discussion of new medical journals Tallulah had ordered from Denver. Finally, as dessert was served, Keme decided directness was required. I'd like to accompany you on your Sunday walk, he said simply. Tallulah's spoon paused midway to her mouth. She set it down carefully beside her untouched dessert. You've been investigating, she observed, no question in her tone. I visited the town records office today, Keme acknowledged. Birth registries are public documents. And what did these public documents tell you, Doctor? Her voice remained steady, though her right hand now displayed a subtle tremor she didn't attempt to hide. That on November 12, 1895, you and Elias welcomed a daughter named Aponi. Kemi maintained eye contact despite Tallulah's increasingly frosty demeanor. A daughter who, for reasons I don't yet understand, appears to live in a cottage in the woods, rather than with her mother in this house. Silence descended, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Tallulah folded her napkin with precise movements before responding. And knowing this, you still wish to accompany me on Sunday? I do. Kemi leaned forward slightly. Not as your physician or your husband in name, but as someone who believes in treating the whole person, not just the symptoms. And your situation. Tallulah has symptoms that suggest complexities beyond what you've shared. Something unexpected happened then. Tallulah laughed, not loudly or freely, but a genuine sound of surprised amusement that transformed her face momentarily. Elias would have appreciated your metaphor, she said, the ghost of a smile lingering. He too believed in looking beyond surface presentations. She rose from the table with characteristic grace, despite the slight stiffness in her movements. Very well, Doctor. Sunday at 10. Dress warmly. The cottage can be cool this time of year. At the dining room doorway she paused. And prepare yourself. What you'll discover may change how you view our arrangement entirely. With that enigmatic warning she departed, leaving Kem to contemplate what revelations awaited him in the stone cottage. The next 2 days would pass with excruciating slowness, each hour bringing him closer to understanding the true purpose of his strange marriage to the mining widow of Raven Hill. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, the October sky a perfect blue vault above the pine-covered mountains. Kemi woke early, his sleep having been restless and filled with fragmented dreams. A child's face he couldn't quite see, tunnels stretching beneath the mountain, Tallulah standing at the edge of a precipice. He dressed carefully in warm clothes as advised, uncertain what the day would bring, but sensing its importance. When he arrived downstairs, he found Tallulah waiting in the entrance hall, dressed not in her usual formal attire, but in a practical, wool walking suit of deep blue. A woven shawl in rich burgundy was draped around her shoulders, and sturdy boots replaced her typical heeled shoes. The overall effect was striking, less the imperious mining widow and more a woman of purpose and practicality. "Good morning," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "I trust you slept well?" "Well enough," Kem replied, noting the small basket she carried. "May I?" He extended his hand toward the basket. After a moment's hesitation, she surrendered it. "Bread, cheese, preserves. We typically share a small meal during these visits." The casual "we" confirmed what Kemi had already deduced. These Sunday excursions were visits to her daughter. The normalcy of bringing food, of sharing a meal, contrasted sharply with the secrecy surrounding Aponi's existence. His confusion must have shown on his face, for Tallulah's expression softened slightly. "Your questions will be answered soon enough, Doctor. Shall we proceed?" They left through a side door, avoiding the main entrance where staff might observe them. The path leading toward the western woods was well maintained, but deliberately inconspicuous, almost invisible unless one knew to look for it. As they walked, in silence, Kem noticed subtle markers along the way, a distinctive stone here, a bent branch there, creating a trail that could be followed even in poor visibility. "Elias established this path," Tallulah said, breaking the silence as they entered the denser forest. "He wanted to ensure the cottage could always be reached safely, regardless of weather conditions. He seems to have been a man who left nothing to chance," Kemi observed, "a necessity in both mining and family matters." Something in her tone suggested deeper meaning. Preparation doesn't eliminate risk, but it makes survival more likely when inevitable challenges arise. They continued in thoughtful silence until the stone cottage came into view, just as Keme had glimpsed it days earlier. In morning light, its details were more apparent: the careful stonework, the well-maintained slate roof, the small garden now prepared for winter dormancy. Smoke curled from the chimney, indicating someone was already inside. Tallulah paused at the edge of the clearing, her expression changing subtly. For the first time since their marriage, Keme saw genuine vulnerability in her features, anticipation, mingled with something that might have been anxiety. "Before we proceed," she said, turning to face him directly, "I must ask for your word as a physician and a man of honor that what you see today remains private, regardless of how our arrangement continues in the future." The request's solemnity struck Keme. "You have my word," he replied without hesitation, "as your doctor, husband, and as someone who respects the sanctity of family matters." Tallulah studied him intently, as if measuring the weight of his promise. Finally, she nodded once. "Very well. Follow me." As they approached the cottage door, Keme heard something unexpected: music. The delicate notes of a piano flowed through the sturdy walls, a complex melody played with remarkable skill. Tallulah's expression softened at the sound, a genuine smile transforming her features. She knocked twice, paused, then once more, a signal rather than a request for entry. The music stopped immediately, followed by quick footsteps. The door opened to reveal not a child as Keme had expected, but a young woman of perhaps 20 years, dressed simply in a woolen dress of forest green. Her dark hair was secured in a practical braid, and her eyes, startlingly similar to Tallulah's, widened at the sight of Keme. "Mother," she said, her voice musical with a slight accent Keme couldn't immediately place. "You've brought a visitor." Tallulah stepped forward, allowing the young woman to embrace her briefly. "Aponi, this is Dr. Keme Adakai, my husband, as you know." She turned to Keme, whose confusion must have been evident. "Doctor, this is my daughter, Aponi Nashota." The young woman, not a child at all, offered a small curtsy that seemed both formal and slightly mocking. "So you're the physician who married my mother for her fortune," she said, her direct gaze assessing him with intelligence that rivaled Tallulah's. "Please, come in before the warmth escapes." The interior of the cottage defied Keme's expectations entirely. Though small compared to the mansion, it was exquisitely appointed. A piano occupied one corner, bookshelves lined the walls, comfortable furniture arranged around a stone fireplace where a cheerful blaze crackled. Large windows allow natural light to flood the space, and several landscape paintings of remarkable quality hung on the walls. What struck Keme most, however, was not the cottage's unexpected elegance, but its accessibility. Wider doorways, specially designed furniture, handrails discreetly installed along walls, adaptations he recognized from his medical training about accommodating physical disabilities. Understanding began to dawn as Aponi moved toward an armchair near the fire. Her gait was unusual, graceful in its own way, but marked by significant difficulty with her right leg, which moved stiffly and seemed to bear less weight than the left. As she seated herself, she arranged her dress to cover what appeared to be a specialized brace, visible beneath the fabric. "You're puzzled, Doctor," she observed, those perceptive eyes missing nothing, no doubt wondering why the birth records list me as born in 1895 when I'm clearly much older. "Aponi," Tallulah cautioned, unpacking the basket onto a small table. "He's your husband, Mother," Aponi replied, with a hint of stubbornness that reminded Keme instantly of Tallulah. "If you've brought him here, he deserves the truth. All of it." Tallulah sighed, conceding the point with a nod. She gestured for Keme to sit while she prepared a pot of tea, already warmed by the fire. I was not born in 1895, Aponi began, her direct manner refreshing after weeks of Tallulah careful revelations. I was born in Hungary in 1882, the daughter of Tallulah Varga and her first husband, Ferenc Varga. Keme glanced sharply at Tallulah, who continued her tea preparations without meeting his gaze. My father was a geologist with radical political ideas, Aponi continued. When Hungarian authorities began arresting his associates, my parents fled to America. I was 3 years old. Her voice softened with memory. We had barely established ourselves in New York when my father contracted pneumonia and died, leaving my mother alone in a foreign country with a young child. Tallulah brought the tea tray to the small table, her movements precise despite the slight tremor in her hands. I had my husband's geological research, his correspondence with American mining companies, and very little else. She added quietly, survival required adaptation. Mother secured a position with Nashota Mining, Aponi picked up the narrative. She presented herself as a widow with expertise in European geological formations. Elias Nashota recognized her brilliance immediately. Within a year, they had married, and we relocated to Eagles Crossing. Keme accepted the cup Tallulah offered, trying to reconcile this new information with what he thought he knew. And yet, you live here rather than at Raven Hill, he observed, and the town records show a birth in 1895, not an arrival years earlier. That, Tallulah said, taking a seat beside her daughter, is where the complexity begins. When we arrived in Eagles Crossing, the mining community was even more provincial than it is now. A foreign woman was barely acceptable as a mine owner's wife. A foreign woman with a disabled child from a previous marriage would have been subject to endless speculation and judgment. My condition results from childhood polio, Aponi explained, gesturing toward her leg. In Hungary, I received excellent medical care. Here in the Western Territories, people tend to view disability with superstition or pity. Neither was acceptable to my mother or Elias. So you created a separate life for her, Keme surmised, addressing Tallulah. She nodded. Elias suggested a solution that would protect Aponi from unwanted attention, while still providing her with everything she needed. We established her initially at a boarding school in Denver, where she received education and continued medical treatment. Meanwhile, in Eagles Crossing, we were simply the childless Nashotas, Aponi added with a hint of old bitterness. I visited rarely, always as a niece from back east, staying briefly before returning to school. As Aponi grew older and her education advanced, she desired more independence, Tallulah continued, and I wished to have her closer. Elias designed this cottage, close enough for regular visits, but separate enough to maintain the narrative we had established. When Elias became ill, he accelerated his plans, Aponi said, her expression softening at the memory. He wanted to ensure I would always have a protected place, regardless of what happened to him or mother. The birth record from 1895, Keme, said understanding Dawn, a legal fiction to establish Aponi as your legitimate daughter with Elias, Tallulah nodded. With my advancing age, it stretches credibility, but money ensures many official accommodations. We needed Aponi officially recognized as Elias's heir to protect her interests against Kamama's claims. Uncle Kamama, Aponi said, the words dripping, with disdain. A man who believes my mother bewitched his brother and stole his birthright. He has spent years attempting to prove she is unstable, foreign, unfit to manage the Nashota holdings. If he discovered my existence, especially the complexity of our situation, he would use it as evidence of deception and fraud. The pieces were finally falling into place for Keme. And this is why you needed a husband, he said to Tallulah. Not just for medical supervision with your condition, but to create another layer of protection around Aponi's inheritance. As my condition progresses, Kimama's claims about my competence gain credibility, Tallulah acknowledged. A respected physician husband with legal authority provides a counterbalance, and should medical decisions become necessary, you would protect both my interests and Aponi's. The northern seam, Kem said, remembering Elias's journal entries. The special minerals, they're meant for Aponi's future, aren't they? A look passed between mother and daughter, pride mingled with something more complex. Show him, Aponi said to her mother. After a moment's hesitation, Tallulah reached into her shawl and withdrew a small pouch. From it, she removed what appeared to be a polished stone pendant, similar to the jet necklace she often wore, but with subtle differences. This stone had unusual coloration, black with veins of deep blue that seemed to shift in the firelight. This comes from the northern seam, Tallulah explained, handing it to Keme, a mineral compound not previously catalogued in geological records. Elias named it Aponi's stone privately, though scientific classification would eventually require a different designation. The stone was surprisingly warm in Kem's palm, seemingly retaining heat beyond what could be explained by its brief contact with Tallulah's hand. Its properties are remarkable, Aponi said, her scientific interest evident. It absorbs and retains heat efficiently. It demonstrates unusual conductivity patterns, and preliminary tests suggest potential applications in everything from medicine to industrial machinery. If developed properly, Tallulah added, it could revolutionize certain technologies. More importantly, it could secure Aponi's future and Eagles Crossing's prosperity for generations, which is why Kimama cannot gain control, Kemi concluded, returning the stone. He would exploit it immediately for maximum profit rather than developing its full potential. Precisely, Tallulah replaced the stone in her pouch. Elias and I established a long-term vision for both the mineral and the community. Kimama sees only dollar values on ledgers. Aponi leaned forward, her gaze intense. Now you understand why my mother made her unusual proposal, Doctor. Not just her health or legal standing, but protection of something much larger, a legacy that extends beyond the Nashota name to potentially benefit many. The morning stretched into the afternoon as they shared the food Tallulah had brought. Their conversation shifted to more personal matters. Aponi's education in science and music, her ongoing correspondence with researchers at Eastern universities, her adaptation of mining engineering principles to improve her mobility devices. Kem was struck by her brilliant mind and determined spirit, clearly inherited from her mother, but expressing itself in unique ways. I design my own braces now, she explained, showing him detailed technical drawings that rivaled any medical illustrations he had studied. Conventional devices prioritize immobilization, but I've found selective flexibility actually improves function if properly supported. Your approach challenges standard orthopedic thinking, Kemi observed, genuinely impressed. Have you published your findings? A shadow crossed Aponi's features. Publishing would require using my name, which could draw attention we've carefully avoided. For now, I correspond with selected physicians under a male pseudonym. The limitations women face in scientific fields compound her already complex situation, Tallulah added with barely contained frustration. Another injustice Elias hoped would change with time. As afternoon light began to fade, Keme sensed their visit drawing to a close. Aponi played a final piece on the piano, a Hungarian folk melody that clearly held emotional significance for both women, before they prepared to depart. At the door, Aponi took Keme's hand in a surprisingly firm grip. Thank you for coming. Today, Doctor, few have been entrusted with our family's full truth. Her directness remained refreshing after weeks of careful conversations at Ravenhill. I hope this knowledge helps you understand why your role is so important to my mother. And to me, The walk back to the mansion proceeded in thoughtful silence, both Kem and Tallulah absorbed in their own reflections. The forest seemed different now. The path more significant, not just a physical connection between structures, but a link between separate realities carefully maintained for protection and survival. As they emerged from the trees with Raven Hill visible ahead, Tallulah finally spoke. "Now you understand why absolute discretion is essential, Doctor. A pony's security depends on maintaining our carefully constructed narrative." "She's remarkable," Keme said simply. "You've done an extraordinary job protecting and nurturing her, under difficult circumstances, not just me." Tallulah's voice softened. "Elias loved her as his own from the beginning. Everything he built in his later years was with her future in mind." They paused at the edge of the formal gardens, the mansion looming before them, a symbol of wealth and power that now revealed itself as partly fortress, partly facade. "Does anyone else know?" Keme asked. "About a pony's true situation?" "Only Genoa, who attended her when she was young, and Hinto, who maintains the cottage and grounds. Their loyalty has been absolute." Tallulah turned to face him directly. "And now you." The weight of this trust settled on Keme's shoulders, not an unwelcome burden, but a responsibility he recognized as significant. "Thank you for sharing this with me," he said quietly. "It changes my understanding of our arrangement considerably. Does it change your willingness to continue?" Tallulah's question carried genuine concern beneath its practical surface. Keme considered carefully before answering. "No, if anything, it strengthens my commitment. What you and Elias built deserves protection, not just the mine or the fortune, but the future you've tried to secure for a pony and for Eagle's Crossing." Relief flickered briefly across Tallulah's features before her customary composure returned. "Then we should proceed with the next phase of our plan," she said, resuming their walk toward the house. "The Henderson contracts will be finalized next week. Once secured, we must prepare for Kimama's inevitable response." "You believe he'll challenge the arrangements directly?" "I know he will." Tallulah's expression hardened. "His lawyers have already filed inquiries about my health and decision-making capacity. Your presence as both husband and physician complicates his strategy but won't deter him entirely." As they reached the mansion's side entrance, Tallulah paused once more. "There's one more thing you should know, Doctor." Her voice carried a new gravity. "The timeline has become more urgent than you realize. My condition is progressing faster than Dr. Mercer's records indicate. The tremors are increasingly difficult to control. The cognitive effects, though still minimal, have begun to manifest." Kem's medical instincts immediately engaged. "Why haven't you mentioned this before? I should conduct a full examination, review your medication." "There will be time for that," Tallulah interrupted gently. "But you should understand that our arrangement may need to evolve more quickly than initially planned. Within a year, possibly less, important decisions will fall increasingly to you." Her gaze held his, unflinching despite the difficult truth she was sharing. "Are you prepared for that responsibility, Kem?" The use of his first name emphasized the personal nature of her question. This was not merely about legal arrangements or medical authority, but about entrusting her life's work and her daughter's future to someone who had been a stranger mere weeks ago. "I am," he answered with quiet certainty. Tallulah nodded once, accepting his commitment. As they entered the house together, Kemi realized that their marriage of convenience had transformed today into something neither had anticipated, a partnership with purpose beyond mere financial or legal advantage. They had become, in an unexpected way, true allies in a cause that transcended both of them. The weeks following Kemi's introduction to a pony brought significant changes to his life at Raven Hill. Having been entrusted with the family's deepest secret, he found his relationship with Tallulah shifting from formal arrangement to genuine partnership. Their evening conversations grew more substantive, with Tallulah sharing decades of business knowledge and Keme offering fresh perspectives on community needs and mining impacts on public health. His medical relationship with Tallulah also evolved. True to her word, she submitted to a complete examination, allowing Keme to assess her condition properly. The results confirmed her private admission. The Parkinson's was advancing more rapidly than Dr. Mercer's records indicated. The tremors were becoming more pronounced, particularly when she was tired or stressed. Muscle rigidity was increasing, making her morning movements especially difficult. "There are promising new treatments being researched back east," Kem told her one evening as they reviewed her medication schedule in her study. "Not cures, but approaches that might slow progression more effectively." "At what cost in side effects?" Tallulah asked pragmatically, ever the clear-eyed businesswoman even regarding her own health. Some sedation, possibly dry mouth, occasional dizziness. Keme made notes in her medical file, but potentially significant improvement in motor control and a slowing of cognitive impact. Tallulah considered this, watching the firelight with those perceptive dark eyes. "Arrange it," she finally decided, "but understand my priority. Clarity of mind over physical comfort. I need my faculties intact for as long as possible, even if my body becomes less cooperative." This pragmatic approach to her declining health reinforced Kem's growing respect for Tallulah. She faced her condition not with denial or self-pity, but with the same strategic thinking she applied to business challenges. Their Sundays now regularly included visits to the cottage, where Keme developed his own relationship with a pony. Her brilliant mind and forthright manner made their conversations intellectually stimulating. They discussed medical advances, engineering principles, and her innovative approach to adaptive equipment. Keme brought medical journals for her review, and she shared her detailed designs for mobility devices that challenged conventional thinking. Traditional medical training often overlooks the patient's lived experience, she observed during one such discussion. Doctors design treatments for conditions rather than for individuals. A fair criticism, Keme acknowledged. "My grandfather's healing practices always began with understanding the whole person, not just the ailment. Western medicine is only beginning to recognize the wisdom in that approach." Aponi's eyes brightened with interest. "Tell me about your grandfather's methods. Mother mentioned he was a traditional healer." As Keme described Navajo healing concepts, Aponi listened intently, occasionally noting connections to European approaches she had studied. Their shared interest in bridging different medical traditions created an unexpected bond between them. Meanwhile, at Raven Hill, the Henderson contract was finalized with terms even more favorable than Tallulah had initially anticipated. The investment would fund the exploration of the northern seam while establishing processing facilities that would employ dozens of additional workers from Eagles Crossing. The contracts include provisions protecting local water sources and requiring reforestation of any cleared areas, Tallulah explained to Keme as they reviewed the final documents. Elias always insisted that mining shouldn't consume the land. "It depends upon forward thinking for his time," Keme observed. "For any time." Tallulah signed the last page with her characteristic precise handwriting, though Keme noted the additional concentration required to maintain steady penmanship. Many still view the land as something to be conquered rather than partnered with. Elias understood the latter approach yields more sustainable prosperity. With the contract secured, attention turned to the anticipated legal challenge from Kimama. Tallulah engaged additional lawyers from Denver, preparing extensive documentation of her sound management decisions and positive business outcomes. Keme's presence as her husband was strategically highlighted in all legal correspondence, establishing his role as both medical authority and business consultant. Kimama will likely petition for a competency hearing, Tallulah's lead attorney. Mr. Holloway explained during a strategy meeting at Raven Hill. He'll cite your health condition, Mrs. Nashota, and claim it renders you unfit to manage the enterprise. A claim easily refuted by the Henderson contract and the mine's productivity. Reports, Tallulah replied calmly. Yes, but these proceedings can become protracted and invasive. Holloway adjusted his spectacles nervously. Your marriage to Dr. Adakai strengthens your position considerably, especially given his medical credentials. However, Kimama's attorneys have begun investigating the doctor's background quite thoroughly. Kem met this news with composure. My history is straightforward. They'll find nothing to undermine my credibility. They're particularly interested in the timing of your marriage, Holloway continued. The convenience of it may be portrayed in unflattering terms. Let them try, Tallulah said with uncharacteristic sharpness. Dr. Adakai's reputation in this community is beyond reproach. His dedication to patients of all backgrounds speaks for itself. The protective note in her voice surprised Kemi. Their arrangement had begun as purely practical, yet Tallulah now defended him with genuine indignation. Something had shifted in their relationship, a mutual respect that transcended their original agreement. As November turned to December, Eagle's Crossing transformed under heavy snowfall. The mountains gleamed white against blue skies, and the town prepared for Christmas celebrations with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. Much of this holiday spirit stemmed from the economic boost provided by the new Henderson contract. With guaranteed work extending into the coming year, miners and merchants alike felt secure enough to indulge in seasonal generosity. Keem's clinic flourished in this atmosphere of community prosperity. With Tallulah's support, he implemented a program providing free vaccinations for miners' children and preventative examinations for workers exposed to coal dust. These initiatives significantly reduced winter illnesses and early signs of lung disease, earning him further respect throughout Eagle's Crossing. You've accomplished more in months than most doctors do in years, Winona remarked as they completed their day's appointments. People who previously avoided medical care now seek it willingly. Access and trust make the difference, Kemi replied, organizing patient records. When people believe healthcare is truly available to them, they utilize it appropriately. And when the doctor is married to the wealthiest woman in the territory, that accessibility becomes much easier to provide, Winona added with a knowing smile. Kime acknowledged this truth with a nod. His marriage to Tallulah had indeed opened doors and resources that transformed his practice from struggling clinic to community health center. The professional validation was gratifying, though he sometimes wondered at the cost. His independence exchanged for patronage, however benevolent. These reflections were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. As Winona departed, for the evening, the clinic door opened to admit a man Keme had never met but instantly recognized from descriptions. Tall, with the same commanding presence as Elias Nashota in his portrait, but harder features and cold eyes that assessed the clinic with obvious disdain. Dr. Adakai, I presume. The man removed expensive leather gloves, tucking them into a coat that probably cost more than all the equipment in the clinic combined. I am Kimama Nashota. I believe we're overdue for a conversation. Keme maintained his professional composure. Despite the surprise, Mr. Nashota, what brings you to my clinic? Curiosity primarily. Kimama moved through the space with the confidence of someone accustomed to ownership. I wanted to meet the man my sister-in-law acquired so expeditiously. The deliberate choice of words revealed much about Kimama's perspective on their marriage. Keme closed the patient ledger carefully before responding. My relationship with Mrs. Nashota is private. If you have business matters to discuss, I suggest you contact her attorneys. Come now, doctor. Kimama smiled without warmth. "We're family. Now are we not? Surely we can speak candidly." He settled into the chair, typically reserved for patients, his posture deliberately casual, yet subtly dominating. "I'll be direct. How much did she offer you?" Keme met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Nashota, patient hours are concluded for today. I have records to complete before returning home." "Home?" Kimama's eyebrows rose. "Is that what you call Raven Hill? An interesting perspective for someone who was practically destitute mere months ago." He leaned forward slightly. "Whatever she's paying you, I can improve the terms considerably." The implication was unmistakable. Keme felt a surge of indignation on Tallulah's behalf, but maintained his professional demeanor. "Mr. Nashota, I'll say this once. My marriage is not a negotiable arrangement. Now I must ask you to leave." Kimama studied him with cold calculation before rising. "Loyalty is admirable, Doctor, but misplaced in this instance. Tallulah Varga is not what she appears. Neither is her situation." He placed unusual emphasis on the last word, watching Kim's expression closely for reaction. "When you're ready to discuss reality rather than the fiction she's constructed, my representatives will be available." He placed a business card on the examination table before departing, leaving behind the lingering scent of expensive cologne, an implicit threat. Keme stared at the card for a long moment before pocketing it. The encounter confirmed everything Tallulah had said about her. Brother-in-law, his entitlement, his ruthlessness, and most concerningly, his hinted knowledge about matters that should remain private. That evening, as their carriage returned to Raven Hill through gently falling snow, Kim recounted the conversation to Tallulah. She listened with characteristic focus, though he noticed her hands clasped tightly to disguise their trembling. "His timing is strategic," she observed when Keme finished. "The Henderson contracts were announced publicly yesterday. He's moving quickly to undermine our position." Her gaze shifted to the window, where snowflakes danced in the lantern light. "And his reference to my situation suggests he may have information about a pony. Or he's fishing for reaction," Kemi suggested. "If he knew definitively about a pony, he would have used that knowledge more explicitly." Tallulah nodded slowly. "Perhaps. Either way, we must accelerate our preparations." She turned back to him, her expression resolute despite the fatigue evident in her features. "The protective trust for a pony must be finalized immediately, and we should increase security at the cottage." That night, after Tallulah retired, Keme found himself unable to sleep. The encounter with Kimama had unsettled him more deeply than he cared to admit. He stood at his bedroom window, watching snow transform the grounds into a pristine landscape that concealed the complexities beneath. His reflection in the glass gave him pause. How different he appeared now in tailored nightclothes, surrounded by luxury, compared to the struggling physician who had opened that cream-colored envelope months earlier. Had he changed fundamentally, or merely adapted to circumstances? And what would become of him when this chapter inevitably closed? The following days brought increased activity to Raven Hill as Tallulah mobilized her resources against Kimama's implied threat. Legal documents were revised, security measures enhanced, and contingency plans established. Through it all, Keme observed Tallulah's deteriorating physical condition with growing concern. The stress visibly accelerated her symptoms, her tremors more pronounced, her movements increasingly stiff, fatigue settling more deeply into her features. "You need to rest," he insisted after finding her still working in her study well past midnight. "Exhaustion exacerbates your symptoms. Time is a luxury I cannot afford," she replied, though she allowed him to take the pen from her trembling fingers. "Kimama won't wait for my convenience to strike." "Then let me help more directly," Kemi offered. "I've reviewed the business documents you've shared. I understand the fundamental operations and priorities. Delegate some of these matters to me." Tallulah looked up at him, surprised momentarily. replacing exhaustion in her expression. "You've been studying the business records, of course. Our arrangement made me your husband and physician, but circumstances require me to understand all aspects of your situation." Kemi spoke matter-of-factly, though the admission revealed more personal investment than their original agreement had stipulated. "I can't defend what I don't comprehend." Something softened in Tallulah features, gratitude perhaps, or recognition of his commitment beyond contractual obligation. With uncharacteristic acquiescence, she allowed him to escort her to her chambers, accepting his medical authority in a way she rarely did. As Christmas approached, snowstorms isolated Eagles Crossing from larger settlements, creating a peaceful interlude in the building tension with Kimama. Kemi used this time to deepen his understanding of the Nashota mining operations and Tallulah's business strategies. He also made daily visits to Aponi, whose cottage was kept accessible by Hinto's diligent snow clearing. These visits gradually transformed from medical check-ins to genuine friendship. Aponi shared her extensive research on the northern seam, minerals, showing Kemi laboratory notes that documented properties unlike any previously known substance. The heat retention capabilities alone could revolutionize home heating efficiency, she explained, demonstrating with samples. And preliminary tests suggest applications in medical devices, particularly for circulation improvement in damaged limbs. "Like your own," Kemi observed, noting how she wore a small pendant of the unusual blue-black stone against her leg brace. "My personal laboratory," she confirmed with a smile. "I've documented measurable improvement in muscle response when the stone is applied with consistent contact." Her scientific rigor impressed Kemi deeply. Despite isolation and limited formal education, Aponi had developed research methodologies that would stand scrutiny in any medical institution. Her innovations with mobility devices similarly demonstrated exceptional engineering insight. "You should be teaching at a university," he told her one afternoon as they reviewed her latest designs. "Your approaches to adaptive technology surpass anything I studied in medical school." "Perhaps someday," she replied, though they both recognized the barriers her situation presented. "For now, I focus on what can be accomplished within our current constraints." This practical acceptance of limitations, while maximizing available opportunities, reminded Kemi powerfully of Tallulah. Though they lacked biological connection, mother and daughter shared a fundamental resilience and strategic mindset that transcended their different circumstances. On Christmas Eve, an unexpected development changed the carefully maintained rhythm of Raven Hill. Snow had fallen heavily for 3 days, making the paths to town impassable even for the sturdy Nashota carriages. The household prepared for a quiet celebration among staff and family when urgent knocking at the main entrance interrupted dinner preparations. Hinto, who had gone to investigate, returned to the main hall with disturbing news. "Riders from town. Mrs. Nashota, there's been an accident at the mine. A section of the east shaft collapsed from snow weight. Men are trapped." Tallulah rose immediately, her expression grave. "How many?" "At least 7, possibly more. They've sent for you because Mr. Henderson's engineers are snowed in at Silverton. They need authority to attempt a dangerous rescue approach." Kemi was already retrieving his medical bag from the study. "I'll need emergency supplies. Are there injuries reported?" "Unknown, Doctor." The messenger said communication with the trapped men is limited. Tallulah moved with decisive purpose, despite her physical limitations. "Prepare the reinforced sled and strongest horses. Hinto, gather the emergency equipment Elias developed after the 94 collapse." She turned to Kemi. "The journey will be difficult. The mine is 3 miles beyond town. I'm coming with you," he stated firmly, anticipating her objection, "both as a physician and as your representative if needed." The determination in his voice precluded argument. Tallulah nodded once, already, focusing on preparations. Within 20 minutes, they were underway, bundled in the heaviest winter gear, seated in a low, sturdy sled designed specifically for snow travel. Hinto managed the two powerful draft horses with expert precision as they began breaking trail, through deep drifts toward Eagle's Crossing. The journey proved arduous beyond expectation. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to mere feet at times, and twice they had to stop to clear deeper drifts from their path. Throughout the difficult journey, Keme observed Tallulah's extraordinary focus and endurance. Despite physical discomfort, that must have been severe, she remained alert and strategic, directing alternative routes when main paths proved impassable. They reached the mine well after nightfall, guided in the final approach by lanterns positioned along the path. The scene that greeted them was controlled chaos, miners and townspeople working in coordinated groups, some removing snow and debris, others preparing timber supports, still others maintaining communication through a narrow air shaft. The mine. Foreman, a weather-beaten man named Chogan, briefed them immediately. 7 men confirmed trapped, Mrs. Nashota. We've established voice contact. 2 injured, 1 seriously. The main support beams are held, creating a pocket of safety, but the secondary entrance is completely blocked. Alternative access options? Tallulah asked without preamble. The vertical ventilation shaft remains partially clear, but is too narrow for adult passage. We're considering breaking through the north wall, where the rock is thinner, but engineers warned last year about potential instability in that section. Keme watched as Tallulah absorbed this information, her mind visibly working through calculations and risks. Despite her illness, despite the punishing journey through snow, her strategic acumen remained undiminished. The north wall approach is too risky, she finally decided. The vibration could trigger a secondary collapse. She turned to Hinto. Bring Elias's equipment case. From the specialized case emerged what appeared to be detailed mine maps unlike any Keme had seen before. 3-dimensional renderings showing not just tunnels, but geological formations, stress points, and hidden natural features. Elias mapped. Sound resonance patterns throughout the mine, Tallulah explained as she examined the documents by lantern light. He could identify structural weaknesses and natural cavities others missed. Her finger traced a line along what appeared to be a narrow natural fissure. Here, this natural limestone channel runs parallel to the east shaft. It's narrow but navigable for rescue equipment, and crucially, it remains structurally independent from the collapsed section. The foreman studied the maps with growing hope. I've worked these mines for 15 years and never knew this passage existed. Elias kept certain findings private, Tallulah replied simply. Prepare the smallest men and lightest equipment. I'll mark the surface access point. What followed was a master class in crisis management. Tallulah directed the rescue operation with calm authority, positioning teams according to Elias's hidden maps, establishing a relay system for equipment, and implementing safety protocols that protected both trapped miners and rescuers. Throughout the night, Keme divided his attention between preparing medical treatment for the injured and observing his wife's extraordinary leadership during the crisis. By dawn, all 7 trapped miners had been brought safely to the surface. Keme treated the injured, one with a broken leg, another with lacerations requiring suturing, all with varying degrees of exposure and respiratory irritation from dust. As he worked, he noticed how the miners and townspeople related to Tallulah, with respect bordering on reverence, not merely for her wealth or position, but for her direct involvement in their rescue. She knew their names. She inquired about specific family members. She demonstrated intimate knowledge of the mine's operations and dangers. This was not the behavior of a distant owner, but of someone intrinsically connected to the community and its well-being. As morning light strengthened and the immediate crisis resolved, exhaustion finally overtook Tallulah. Kemi found her seated on a supply crate, her right hand trembling violently, her face drawn with fatigue, but illuminated by quiet satisfaction as she watched reunions between rescued miners and their families. "You need rest and medication," he said softly, kneeling beside her to check her pulse. "We should return to Raven Hill." "Soon," she agreed, too exhausted to maintain her usual independence. She gazed out at the activity surrounding the mine entrance. "They're good people, Kemi, worth every effort to protect." "They see that in you," he replied, understanding now a dimension of Tallulah he had previously missed. Her connection to Eagle's Crossing transcended business interest. It was deeply personal, almost maternal in its protective nature. As they finally prepared for the journey home, the mine foreman approached with something clutched carefully in his gloved hands. "Found this in the eastern chamber, Mrs. Nashota," he said, extending what appeared to be a rough stone specimen. "Thought you should see it right away." Even in its unpolished state, Kemi recognized the distinctive blue-black coloration of a pony's stone. Tallulah accepted it with a carefully controlled expression, though Kemi detected a momentary alarm in her eyes. "From which section specifically?" she asked, her voice neutral. "The new expansion where we were clearing yesterday before the collapse." Chogan looked uncomfortable, lowering his voice. "There's more, ma'am. Quite a bit more. The collapse exposed a significant vein." Tallulah nodded once, pocketing the specimen. "Say nothing of this for now. Continue operations as planned until I provide further instructions." The implications were clear. The Northern Seam's special mineral had been discovered unexpectedly early in an active mining section rather than the protected northern area Elias had sealed. This accidental exposure threatened the carefully managed development timeline Tallulah and Elias had established for a pony's stone. As their sled began the journey back to Raven Hill, Kemi understood that circumstances had accelerated beyond their careful planning. Kamama's threats, Tallulah's advancing condition, and now this premature discovery converged to create a perfect storm of challenges to everything they sought to protect. Looking at Tallulah, exhausted yet still radiating quiet determination, Kemi realized that his commitment had transformed completely. What had begun as a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement between strangers, had evolved into something he hadn't anticipated, a shared purpose that transcended self-interest. Whatever came next, they would face it not as contractual and partners, but as true allies in a cause greater than either had initially imagined. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.